Hey there, folks. Okay, this is episode one of hopefully many Talking Dirt from DPF guys. And thank you all for watching and joining us. So, we are DPF guys out of Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm James, the DPF guy. You may have seen me on TikTok or other YouTube videos. And what we do 100% of the time, we clean and maintain after treatment components. And that goes all the way from EGR cooler, EGR valve, seventh injector, DOC, DPF, def doser, decomp chamber, SCR, and that's pretty much it. But that any of those pieces can get uh, damaged or dirty or require maintenance, and that's what we do. Um, and so on one TikTok video some time ago, I was communicating with one of the drivers. His name is Clinton, and he's got I think a PACCAR engine, and our guest can kind of clear me up on that. But and he was just saying, man, I've got over 400,000 miles on my truck, and I have never had to do a parked regen, and which is pretty impressive stuff. So he's kind of like, is that normal? And I said, well, someone's taking really good care of their truck, and I did say, if you're ever in Atlanta, come by and see me, and he did. And so we talked a lot about how his truck runs, what he does to keep it running, and lo and behold, he talked a lot about Amsoil. And of course, like anybody who doesn't live under a rock, I've heard of Amsoil, but didn't really know much about it, what it did, what it's supposed to do. And actually hearing the success story from an actual user really piqued my interest. And I asked him, I said, who do you get this from? Where do you learn about it? And he goes, I work with Eben Rockmaker, which actually doesn't even sound like a real name, but it's real, trust me. And when you meet him, he definitely looks like an Eben Rockmaker, and out of Las Vegas, Nevada. And unlike what they say, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. If it's something that happens that will improve the reliability of your rig, I want to tell you about it. So anyway, without further ado, we have Eben Rockmaker on the other line here. There he is, from his home in Las Vegas, Nevada. And I've been enjoying getting to know him, getting to know his products. And so, here we are. So Eben, what do you got to say about all that?
I love the story. And yeah, it started way back. Oh my gosh, this is 4 years ago with Clinton. And he was on my YouTube channel. Then he bought the products. And then, all the way up to where you led to. This is 400,000 miles later. I think he had a 2019 Freightliner Cascadia with the X15 Cummins motor. And so you're hearing 400,000 miles later with, I guess you said, Jim, no regen. Is that right?
That is correct. That is correct.
And what is a regen?
So, that's a great question. So, it's a swear word to many to many truckers. But so when any truck that has functioning after treatment, they're going to have the DOC and the DPF, and the main working component of that is the DPF, or the diesel particulate filter. And what that does is catches all of the soot and ash, and we'll talk more about that in a second, that comes off of the as you burn the diesel fuel. Now, in a perfect world, if diesel combusted 100% efficiently, there wouldn't be any soot remaining, but it's not 100% efficient all the time. And so sometimes you do have some soot that does pass down the exhaust pipe, and you want to keep that out of the air that we breathe, because it's pretty noxious. And that stuff goes into the DPF filter, and where it gets trapped, like any filter, like a vacuum cleaner filter or a coffee filter, the stuff you don't want to get into the into the air or into what you drink is caught in the filter. Now the soot will build up over time, and when you do a regen, what the truck will do, either passively or actively, and I'll talk more about that in a second, is will add a little unburned hydrocarbon, a little unburned diesel fuel into the exhaust stream. That passes down and then tickles the DOC, the diesel oxidation catalyst. That has several precious metals in it, which are, write these down, platinum, palladium, and rhodium. And of the three, the platinum is the cheap one, and the rhodium's the expensive one. I think 14,000 bucks an ounce for rhodium, and 1,200 bucks an ounce for platinum. But when the hot exhaust comes off the engine mixed in with this unburned hydrocarbon, and it hits that DOC. It increases the temperature from whatever the exhaust temp is, which is usually 700 or 800 degrees plus or minus off of the engine, and it will ramp it up to about 1100 degrees Fahrenheit. And just like when you
Wow.
clean your oven, you crank it up to 500 600 degrees. That heat goes in there and burns up the soot. Um, the soot is really, for the most part, unburned diesel fuel, so it'll turn much of it into gas, and it passes down through the rest of the system and is cleaned by the SCR, and out it goes. And really, if everything works properly, all that should come out of your tailpipe is literally water and nitrogen, and some carbon
Wow.
dioxide. But so
Wow.
that's what the regen is. Now, Clinton's truck does passively regen because that's just going to happen while you're driving. But what he was talking about, he's never had to pull over and do a parked regen. Now, a parked
Mm.
regen happens when a lot of times when somebody will, if they don't have an auxiliary power unit, an APU, and they're parked in a truck stop overnight and they're taking a snooze and they don't want to freeze or melt, they idle their truck so that they can have heat or AC. And that idling, since the engine is running at a lower RPM, isn't generating enough heat to burn the soot off of it. So
Mm.
a lot of times you'll have to do a parked regen to kind of burn that off, or it's just, if you have a lot of buildup because of, having, the fuel not burning quite right or whatever it is, the passive regen that happens while you're driving doesn't do the trick. So you need to pull over and do a parked regen. And so Clinton has literally been hammered down on that truck for, you know, a long time, almost 500,000 miles, and has not had to do a parked regen yet. And that has everything to do with the additives he uses as well as how well he maintains the truck.
That's awesome. So what is the RPM when they do that park to regen?
I don't know. It's kind of you're kind of stumping me on that one. More, it's more than than it would be just idling. And when somebody does a parked regen or a forced regen, you'll hear that, on some trucks, it roars, it really goes. Um,
Wow.
and, and so, if you can avoid a parked regen, you're avoiding, just the time you got to sit there twiddling your thumbs while you wait for it to finish. And you're also avoiding the additional wear and tear on your engine and the fuel that you're burning just to run the engine hard enough to generate enough thermal energy, enough heat to cook off that soot. And keep in mind, I said there were two things that end up in your DPF. One of them is soot, which is a natural byproduct of combusting diesel fuel, and the other is ash, and that's actually going to be, one of the things I think that we've discussed the fascinating, the scintillating topic of ash in length offline here, but the ash actually comes from your motor oil, and that will build up, and so the quality of your motor oil can make a big difference of it. And of course, the fuel additives, if they're good and functional fuel additives, will cause your fuel to burn more efficiently, more completely, which gains you some fuel economy, because you're getting more energy out of every gallon of diesel. But it'll also, because the diesel fuel is burning more completely, there are less waste, there's less byproduct, less soot, because it's burning more thoroughly. So, and that falls right into the wheelhouse of Mr. Rockmaker, because he's got stuff in bottles that is designed to do all that stuff.
Yeah, yeah. So how long do they usually sit there and idle? I'm curious, 'cause I never asked Clinton all this stuff.
Well, it's, talk about when he's, you're talking about idling, like, when he's doing his rest at a truck stop, or
Yeah, like the
um,
park regen. I wonder how long those usually take.
they can take a long time, and it can literally take 30 to 45 minutes, 30 minutes to an hour. And
Wow.
if your DPF is in rough shape, if it's really full, that truck's going to try really, really hard to burn the soot out of there, and it could run. I've heard people saying that this thing ran for 2 hours and eventually just gave up.
Hmm.
And that's a lot of wear and tear on the engine, a lot of noise, a lot of heat, and a lot of fuel. Um, so a parked regen's not the end of the world. It's what the truck is designed to do, but you do want to really, if you're starting, what happens is people say, well, you know I haven't had to do any regens, and then they'll say, well, I had to do one once every 2 weeks, and then it'll be once a week, then twice a week, then once a day, and then pretty soon the truck gives up. So if you do have a truck that hadn't called for parked regens and is starting to call for them more and more, that can indicate that it's time to get something cleaned up. But yeah, so we threw up a picture on the screen. We've got the before and after. So up above is a dirty DPF. Down below is what a clean one looks like. And the dirt there isn't just on the surface; it goes all the way down. Like this particular DPF is probably about a foot thick, and the soot and ash embedded in there will pretty much go through the entire thing. So it's important to get out. And so what the regen does is we'll burn the soot. But it doesn't eliminate it. It doesn't, I always say my analogy is like my garbage can here. I can sit there and I can squish the things down in here and give myself some more room, but eventually I got to take it out to the trash outside because there's no more room. So regen is kind of like compressing everything down, burning it off, but it doesn't magically make it disappear. So a parked regen will buy you time, but it's kind of telling you that it's time to start thinking about getting stuff cleaned out.
So I wonder, by the time it's time for a regen, it sounds like that DPF filter is about what, a third clogged?
It varies so much by engine and truck and how it's driven and what environment it's driven in, that sort of thing. But generally speaking, that's probably I don't know if it's a third or 2/3 or a half, but basically it's telling you that it's getting to be time. And so I always tell people, if you're starting to get parked regens, you don't want to be someplace where you're rolling the dice on that, where all of a sudden you're up in the mountains with 55,000 pounds in the box and you're stuck and calling for a tow. When a truck calling for parked regens, it's just really telling you that my stuff isn't breathing as well as it should be. I'm doing the best I can to get stuff out, to burn the soot off, but plan on in the next few weeks to get things cleaned up so you're not stuck on the side of the road and getting towed somewhere.
So by the time they're ready for a regen, they're probably already losing fuel mileage. Like, do you have any idea, talking to some of your customers, like how much they're already losing?
It varies so much, but kind of the rule of thumb and what people find in, doing more analysis of larger fleets is the difference between a clean DPF and a dirty DPF. Now, again, your mileage may vary, like we always say, can increase your fuel economy with, going from a dirty DPF to a clean DPF can increase your fuel economy by up to 5% and power and
Wow.
what have you. Because you think about it, I
Wow.
mean, it's, a plugged up DPF is really like a banana in your tailpipe. And, so it makes a big difference. And so I'm not saying you have to get your DPF cleaned every 10 minutes, but, if you can't remember the last time you got it done, you might want to get it done.
I love that. That's going to be great for the viewers. Yeah, I love that. That's awesome.
So one of the things we were talking about now, again, I think, talking about fuel additives might be, kind of more of a, second conversation to have because it's a
Sure.
little more difficult to put your finger on. But a lot of my customers will run, motor oil, run Rotella. One thing Clinton does, he does 100% Amsoil, 100% synthetic oil. Clinton and I had a conversation last week about motor oil, and he was talking about some of the research that's been done as far as like how much oil you consume, the lubricity of oil from day one to until when it's one half, all of that. Now remember, soot is put into your filter from incomplete combustion of diesel fuel, and the ash comes from burning metals out of from your motor oil. And Clinton can speak more about this as far as like what metals are naturally in motor oil, as far as the actual chemistry of the motor oil. But also when oil breaks down, it builds up metals from the actual engine as well. And I was really astounded to learn that some of these full synthetic oils, and Clinton can explain about what makes a full synthetic, because I didn't realize this, but a full synthetic oil can be labeled full synthetic and it is not necessarily 100% synthetic. And maybe that's something Clinton could talk about the difference between putting in a decent oil, a Rotella or whatever it is, combined to putting in a real decent oil like an Amsoil. And yes, it's more expensive, but does it end up costing much less in the long run, not just from the oil changes, but also from improved fuel economy, also from reduced maintenance and things like that. And I again, using Clinton as an example, I think he's a good testimony for the success a person can have by using extremely high quality motor oils.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Yeah.
Well, of
Do you have
course
any
you agree, because
questions, Kim, that we
I'm
should
convincing.
that we
But
should go over?
it's just but I'm more concerned. Like, what do you have to say about motor oil? Like, the thing is, you can get Rotella all day long at Walmart. It's good oil, nothing wrong with it. But
Mhm.
what about that compared to an Amsoil?
Yeah, so the biggest difference is an oil manufacturer, like you were saying, they can call a full synthetic when it's only 25% synthetic. So it's kind of misleading. A lot of people, they go, man, on my next oil change, should I go with this synthetic blend, which is usually 1 to 15% synthetic?
Oh,
And then you got the full synthetics, which are only like 25% synthetic and more. And most of them just barely meet the industry standard. And for instance, something like this, compared to the cylinder scuff test, the Detroit diesel, 6 times more wear protection than that test, and you'll actually see that on the site. They talk about it, and so it's the actual film strength that's keeping the metal parts separated, and it's kind of like if you think of jagged rocks and how much friction they'd have if as like a mineral oil, and then you got the 100% synthetic, which would be more of like these little teeny marbles, and they're all almost exactly the same shape, size, and the way they fit together. There's a lot less friction, less heat, less wear, and less oil consumption because it seals the cylinder. So the cylinder seals, and and it's the same thing with a lot of the fuel additives. And a lot of people they've never tried it, and it's like once you try something, then you kind of get the whole experience. And Clinton was one of my first to try the oil, and now he's actually on to the 10W30 is what his favorite is now, and he actually saw a big bump in fuel mileage with that. So
what would you talked about that with him using different grades of oil, um, and uh, so he actually went to a heavier or lighter weight oil. And what was his concern? He was concerned that he would, I guess, you're talking about he was running one type of oil, started running another type of oil. What made him not want to switch, even though he was successful once he switched? What was he afraid of?
he wasn't afraid of anything. He just wanted to try to get his toes wet and see how much better fuel mileage he could get because he's super technical with his truck. And this is like an OEM viscosity. About 90% of everything comes with the 15W40. And basically, the 15 stands for the winter weight. And then the 40 stands for the operating temperature viscosity, which is at 100 degrees Celsius, which is 212 degrees Fahrenheit. So he actually initially went to a 5W30 and he was happy with it. But I even recommended the 10W30, which has a little bit less cold flow additives for the cold and it'll hold up a little bit better in the high heat. So he ended up going to the 10W30, which at the moment that was his favorite. And he got a bump of fuel mileage on the highway. I'm going to say somewhere in the neighborhood of a half a mile a gallon, and then his city, is maybe zero point 0.2 average better, but accumulatively it saves, a lot over the mileage of the year. So
Right.
so at the moment, that's what his favorite is. And a lot of the new diesel trucks, like I think the Power Stroke, they all come with 10W30. And the big scare is it thick enough to keep
That's
those metal parts separated? And a lot of the times, it's actually not the viscosity, which a lot of people think, it's the actual quality of the oil. And when it's the 100% synthetic, that's what makes quite a bit of a difference. And that's what he went through that process of doing the oil analysis, which we shared on my YouTube channel, Synthetic Oil Protection. And there was so much less wear metals than his previous oil, which he'll talk when he comes on what he used before. But basically, the wear metals were so low, and I was blown away. I'm like, man, I can't believe the wear metals are that low with that thin of an oil. Because I used to think, you want to stay thick, keep that metal separated with the viscosity. But the way the Amsoil is, it doesn't shear down, and that has to do with the base stock that holds those metal parts separated, doesn't thin out under high heat and pressure. And this is 80% of this is a base stock, and then the 20% are additives like the cold flow additives, which is the winter weight, and then you got the anti-wear metals, zinc, phosphorus, and all your other sulfated ash and stuff like that, which is in all motor oil. And then another thing that is really good is the cold flow additives on these, that it doesn't break down like a lot of the other oils as it oxidizes. For like every 18 degrees hotter the oil runs, the lubricant oxidizes at twice the rate. So this oil will break down significantly slower than the other oils. So after you have a used oil, when you cold start it, you're going to have that extra protection because those additive packages aren't as oxidized. So that's one of the big benefits of him going over to this oil. And then he's able to go about 3 times the OEM interval with the 10W30 is what he was doing. And we did the oil analysis, which if you want, Jim, you can share a link to that. I think that would be good for them to see.
Okay.
And they'll see his results.
Super cool. And so and again, I'm a pretty smart guy when it comes to DPFs and what have you. I'm not, I don't have the depth of knowledge when it comes to motor oils. But you had said that there are metals in the motor oil, correct? I mean that, and you said zinc and what else?
Zinc, sulfated ash, and phosphorus, and those are all the usual additive packages. There's other ones that are very limited, like moly, and there's a couple other ones that are in there, but they're such a small percentage
Okay.
of what's in it. And I get a lot of people there. They go, "Oh, I have a sensitive emission system," and they go, I don't want any metals in my oil. But it's like if you had this and you burn basically 76% less oil, which compared to the Detroit diesel standard, and you'll see it under this product link, this burns about 76% less oil consumption. And that's basically the blow by going through the pistons. And so if you don't burn any oil, you're not going to really have any metals in your filters.
So that's exactly, so that is the ash comes from the metals, and the metals come from just what's designed into the oil itself, and also so two things. If you're not using, what Eben's talking about here is you'll have more oil consumption, which is just natural. And all oils have metals in them, so those metals will burn and end up as ash in your DPF. The other thing is, you talked about the oil testing and how when you actually use different motor oils, you have more piston wear, and the wear is basically grinding down very slowly on your metal parts in your engine, and then those metals get into the oil, and the oil burns and out it goes. So I can actually tell the difference when I'm looking at a DPF, the quality and how frequently they change their oil, just based upon how much ash is in and the color of the ash. Believe it or not, you can actually see when we flush those filters and capture that. You can be like, this guy has an oil problem because he's got a lot of, there's more ash in here. So this is 100%, true. I can kind of see it. And I'm like, I didn't know what was causing it, but now it starts to make more and more sense to me.
So a question for my viewers back on my channel: what would someone that runs Rotella, the usual 15W40 Rotella, how often? And I know you don't know; it depends on the truck, I'm sure. But roughly, how often do you think they would be doing their cleaning with you?
So all things being equal and not controlling, not being able to control the quality of oil and things like that, you're probably looking at a recommended DPF cleaning interval of about 160,000 miles. Now, I tell people to, it's not that if you go 161,000 miles, your truck's going to come to a screeching halt. I don't mean that. But that's kind of, and that number has been determined by looking at large fleets of literally 100,000 or 200,000 trucks. And the
Wow.
160,000 miles is is kind of the number. Now, if you've got a well-maintained truck with, good oil and everything else, that number could be double that. You could be at, 300, 360. Or
Wow.
like in Clinton's case, he's at over 400,000 miles and hasn't had to do a forced regen in that entire amount of time, which he might,
Wow.
again, he might go 600,000 miles safely and comfortably without needing a DPF cleaning. And,
Wow.
maybe we should hide this video, because if everybody does this, I won't have any customers. So, but no, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if Clinton, gets to 500,000 or 600,000 miles before he needs to get a DPF cleaning. And even then, his truck won't be shut down on the side of the road. It'll just be ready.
So my viewers, so for them to know roughly what would on Clinton's X15 2019 Freightliner Cascadia, roughly what would the cleaning cost on his truck?
It's really not bad. And it varies. It'll vary, where you are and, how they do it. So, keep in mind that we don't touch the truck. We do the work once once the filters are off the truck. So you would have some cost for a mechanic to take, everything off the truck. And it's not an incredibly technical job. I mean, some handy drivers do it themselves. But so you'd have a cost to remove it off the truck. We'd clean it the next day, because we do a 24-hour turnaround time. You'd have, the mechanic would come back and put everything back on the truck, hook up his computer, reset soot levels, maybe regen the truck. And, that's one number. And it's probably, and again, it's going to vary, but you're probably going to spend $800 for a mechanic plus or minus to take everything off, remove, reinstall, reset. The 3 R's. It's like the pirate sound, R. So that's that. Um, and and then on our side, we're going to be wanting to clean two main components. One is the DOC. We talked about the diesel oxidation catalyst. That's the one with the three metals. Do you remember what they were? Rhodium, platinum, palladium. And it's what produces the heat during a regen to cook the soot off. That's the first thing that the exhaust passes through. So even though it's not a filter, it's more like a screen door. It still does build up soot. And for every 100 grams of soot that we get out of a DPF, there'll be 10 grams in the DOC. Some people don't clean the DOC, but we do recommend it, because what happens is if you don't clean the DOC and you clean the DPF, the flow rate will improve, and all of that soot will jump from the DOC into the DPF. Not the end of the world, doesn't hurt anything. It just means that you got your DPF dirtier faster and you have to clean it again. So get the DOC done. But then you're going to also do the DPF. Now, in our case, you're usually looking at about $125. Again, this is going to be on like somebody with a typical Cummins type engine. A Detroit's different because it's got a one box, it's got more parts to it. But the DOC, $125, DPF around $295. So you're $420. Which I think Elon Musk would find very amusing. And that's for the cleaning. And then you're going to want to you'll need to replace the graphite gaskets. That might run, for all your gaskets might be 75 or $100. And you'll probably, need some new clamps. That's another, $150 or so. So you're going to be in the $400 to $500 for the DPF and DOC cleaning. And then maybe another couple $100 for the replacement clamps and gaskets and things like that. So, you're probably, if you've got a good functioning DPF system, you're probably going to spend around $1,600 all in every 400,000 miles. Though we do tell you to come in every 160, but if you run your truck right, you can stretch that quite a bit.
Nice. And what is the usual downtime for some of these guys that, like on Clinton's truck, what would that turnaround time be? How long do you think that truck would be off the road?
So, we understand that if the wheels aren't turning on these trucks, you're not earning money, right? And so, ideally you'd want somebody to handle this in a preventative, sort of, they're not, they don't have a load, they're not, desperate. But so we want to get you in and out in 24 hours. Which is how long the process takes. So
That's great.
yeah, so that, we want to have somebody like, for instance, a truck, they dropped off filters today. they'll be able to pick those filters up tomorrow, like 11 o'clock, 1 o'clock, and get them back on the truck and get rolling. So we don't want somebody waiting on us for more than a day. And we actually do need that time, because even if we start the filters at 8 o'clock in the morning, every filter we do does get a full bake or a overnight regen. And that's, even after it's been cleaned, we still do that process because we want to get everything out of the filter. We don't want to leave anything behind. We want that filter to be like new. So there's as much room as possible in that filter. So as even though as much as we love our customers, we want to see them as infrequently as possible. So if we were to partially do the job, it would still be good enough to get the truck running again. But if we leave, 10% of the soot and ash in there, two things. One is it's going to get dirty faster because there's less room for more junk. And what happens is when you leave anything behind in the filter, over time, it does what's called sintering. And sintering is when you have particulate matter and you don't quite melt it, but you get it hot enough where it starts to become like concrete, kind of becomes like a solid piece, and it doesn't want to come out of the filter. And
Wow.
so that's that, you want to avoid that. And that's why people will talk about, oh, I thought you could only clean a DPF filter twice or three times. And the reason that they're familiar with that is because they're used to processes that don't get everything out. So that leaves that little plug in, the next time leaves a little bit more and a little bit more in. And eventually that filter is basically, almost full by the time you put it back on the truck. And so that's where someone will say, I'll clean it twice and throw it away. We want to clean it properly. And if all goes well, and if something doesn't go wrong in the engine where you have something that overfuels, produces a ton of heat that does damage downstream in the after treatment, again, cross your fingers, we should be able to make a DPF last the life of the truck. And again, sometimes not, but that's our goal.
So that I love that goal. That's a beautiful thing. And I love hearing that, I always like to connect with people that do the right thing. And when Clinton told me about this, I said, I'm in, I want to talk to you. So now that leads me into the question on a truck like Clinton's, given he brings it to you and you clean it properly, roughly how many cleanings would be realistic that DPF filter would last for?
Well, knowing his truck and knowing the quality of the Cummins after treatment, which is excellent, it's real durable, very cleanable.
Wow.
So let's say he finally comes to me, and let's just be, let's say 500,000 miles, just for round numbers. If he's still driving the truck in the same way that he's been driving it, I probably wouldn't need to see him again until he's got 1,000,000 miles on it. By then he's probably going to be ready to trade that thing on something else. But in theory, if you really like the truck and wanted to keep it, if everything kept running the same way, I'd see him again at 1.5 million, and then at 2 million, and so on and so forth. But at that point, he's probably going to get an engine rebuild, and there's going to be something else going on. But literally a person like Clint comes in at 500,000 miles, I would see him again at 1 million, and then see him again in 1.5 million. And in theory, if he just kept driving that truck, I'd see him at 2 million and still be cleaning the same DPF.
Wow.
Assuming that something, again, that if it didn't start to break down and physically start to erode, which some of them do over time, just due to the heat cycles and everything else. But again, life of the vehicle usually.
Wow. So the whole stigma type thing that I hear that, oh, we just had to get a new DPF for this truck and that truck. Because I just spoke to someone here in town actually, and they just said that, and this is at like 170,000 miles, but I think it was a tow truck, but that's a lot of idle hours. But basically you're saying if you maintain it properly, even bringing it to you, you can do 4 or 5 good deep cleanings, and as long as it's properly maintained, it'll make it through those 5 deep cleanings, and it really can last the life of that truck.
Absolutely. Now, your friend with the tow truck is, that's a little different than Clinton because it's a medium duty vehicle, and when those guys, the Ford F350s and 450s and the Ram 2500s and 3500s and the Duramaxes, right? which are going to be ambulances, tow trucks, flatbeds. And yes, they have a lot of idle time on them. And sadly, those DPF filters were never designed to be cleaned. And so when you go to the dealership and you've got a Ford F350 or 450 or whatever it is, or a Ram, and you're just like, well, I've got, and let's say that the truck is well maintained and everything else, right? Nothing's broken. It's just doing its job. And now it's full. The Ford dealership will tell you two things. They'll say, one, the bad news is your DPF is full, and guess what? You've got to replace it, and that'll be $7,000. And the worst news is get in line because there's 147 people in front of you waiting for one, and we can probably get you one by sometime around Christmas. And guess what? That's a tow truck that's not making money while you wait for this filter to come in. So so I think about I had an ambulance company they were all based on Ford frames, and we cleaned filters for 3 of their ambulances that had been down for 6 months waiting for parts to come in until they found out about us. And so we took those 3 filters, got them cleaned 24 hours back. And cleaning the filter on a medium duty requires a different process. You can check out our TikTok videos on this. We show it all the time. And it does cost a bit more. It's about $750 flat to clean the DPF and DOC on a Ford F350. That same that version of that truck. And we did 3 DPS for them, and it was literally half the price. No, it was less than half the price of replacing one, and they got their assets back on the road 24 hours later. So it was a win-win all around. I mean, I really appreciated and enjoyed, the revenue and the business, and they were thrilled that they were able to get this all done so quickly and for a fraction of the cost and get their ambulances back on the road.
So question on price of a DPF filter, what would it cost on, say, like a Duramax, just a regular pickup truck everybody drives, then an ambulance, and then Clinton's truck? What would those 3 prices roughly be?
Well, it's, I don't have them all, memorized, but I know it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility that the replacement DPF for one of those ambulances, which is going to be a Ford F350 or F450, even though above the frame, it's different. It's basically the same underneath, same exhaust system. I believe those are around $6,000, maybe $5,700. I'm not sure about a Duramax, how much they sell those things for. I do know that we just picked up a DPF, DOC, and SCR off of a Cummins 6.7. I think it's a box truck that had a 6.7 in it. That it lost a turbo, so it pumped a bunch of oil, downstream into everything, DPF, DOC, and SCR. And
Oof.
I think they were talking about $11,000 or $12,000 to replace those components. And it's going to take us some elbow grease to make that right. But, we'll probably do that all for $1,500. So, on Clinton's truck, a lot of times drivers replace their DPS because they're like, well, hey, it's been 300,000 miles. Why not just replace it? But you're probably looking at, a DOC could cost you, all of $4,000 for a Cummins one, 3,800, they're not cheap. Because again, they're full of platinum, palladium, and rhodium, expensive stuff. DPF, I mean, to replace a DPF and DOC on Clinton's truck wouldn't surprise me a bit if it was $8,000 or darn close.
Wow. So that downtime would be at least 2 days, and it would be at least about $8,000 on his truck.
Now, again, if you were to put a new DPF and DOC on his truck, and let's say he, ordered it from the dealership in advance, he could pull in and be in and out in a day, but,
Oh, wow.
because if you have the parts there, you basically take the old ones off, put the new ones in, out you go. So on one hand, if you work with us, you have to, you do have to be patient and wait, give us a day. I don't know, maybe but you're going to get everything done for, $500, $600, $700 on my side. And, sort of 1/10 of the price of replacing it, because remember that if you're going to put a new DPF and DOC on your truck, you'll still have to pay a mechanic to take your old filters off, pay a mechanic to put your new filters on, hook up the computer, reset, all that stuff. So that doesn't go away. So if somebody's willing to hang tight for 24 hours and save 90%, we're all about it.
Wow, I see. I never knew that. So a little bit of clarification if I got this. There's a DPF filter, and then the other thing is you said it's a DOC. Is that
DOC.
right?
So the DOC is first. So the exhaust flows to the DOC, and some people call it a catalytic converter, but it's the catalyst. So the DOC is the real magic piece of this whole thing. The DPF is just a garbage can, just a filter, just catching, it's just sitting there passively catching soot. The DOC is super interesting. And I always wonder, how do these guys figure this stuff out? But so the DOC is there, and it's impregnated with these precious metals, which are, if you remember, platinum, palladium, and rhodium, all the EMs. And so during a regen, the truck will squirt a little unburned diesel into the exhaust stream, which flows down, which is about 700-800 degrees. When that temperature from the exhaust and that additional hydrocarbon, that additional unburned diesel in the exhaust hits that DOC, alakazam, it increases the temperature by about 400 degrees or so, and that produces that intense heat that you need to burn off the soot and convert it into ash. So there's the two things that, and then of course down the road you've got the SCR and stuff. We'll talk about that some other time. But the things that that I deal with are usually the DOC and the DPF.
So the neglected, basically emission system would need a replacement of the DOC and the DPF.
Well, honestly, you'd probably just do the DPF.
All right.
But but I've seen people replace DOCs when they don't need to. But yeah, let's so basically just replace the DPF unless it's not so many people are real reactive about this though, because they'll say, oh, my truck's not completing a regen, and a lot of times the dealers say, oh, you need a new DOC and a new DPF, and that'll be $8,000. And a lot of times the reason it's not completing the regen has nothing to do with anything being wrong. It's just that there's so much junk in the DPF that the regen process is no longer capable. Again, it would be like, just cleaning your oven and never, never brushing the the burned off stuff out of it. Eventually you're going to have no room for your turkey because it's full of burned off pie crust and whatnot. So, but yeah, that's a good question.
So the DOC, that one usually doesn't have to be replaced, but if they just go to the dealer and sometimes they just go, oh, we'll just replace both of them. People that don't know better, they'll just get both replaced.
Correct. Now, sometimes the DOC does, there are cases where the DOC does go bad, and it's so, again, it's actually so simple if you know what to look for as far as in the diagnostic, looking at temperatures and things, to know if the DOC is okay. But a lot of people don't know. Even the mechanics just don't. They're like, oh, they follow the trouble tree. They don't, and they're like, when you tell them what temperatures to look at, they're like, oh, that makes so much sense. I wish I would have known that. And it has to do with, the truck will take a temperature of the exhaust before it goes into the DOC, and after it leaves the DOC, and you should see that increase in temp. And I don't want to get too far in the weeds here, but there's a thing called temperature inversion, and basically, in a nutshell, that just means that your DPF starts identifying as a DOC, because remember, the DOC's job is to produce heat to burn off the emissions product. And what'll happen is, if a DOC fails, unless it just melts and falls to pieces, but if a DOC fails, what normally happens is those three precious metals, which are platinum, palladium, and rhodium, you're going to remember this one of these days. And what they do is those will flush out of the DOC and get trapped in the DPF, because that's what the DPF does. It catches particles, and the particles of these precious metals will come out and make their way into the and that's almost 2,000 grams, 4.02 pounds of soot out of a DPF. Amazing. But
Wow.
So I was getting at with the DOC is, if the DOC releases, like lets go of those precious metals, to the point where it's no longer able to produce that heat. Um, and there's a couple things that can cause it, but one of them is if coolant gets into the system, the
Ooh,
the glycol, or whatever the chemical is in the coolant,
yeah.
can cause the adhesives that attach these precious metals, which are platinum, palladium, and rhodium, right? It's the
Yep.
three P's, three P's and
Wow.
two P's in an R. And those precious metals will work their way down into the DPF. So if you're just looking at temperatures, you can tell if the DOC is working well. And again, it can get weird because if it's not dosing the hydrocarbon or whatever, but there's a whole long video about that. Um,
So,
you'll notice
uh,
what'll be interesting is there's three temperature sensors in every system: the inlet of the DOC, the outlet of the DOC, so the temperature before and after, and then there's a third temperature sensor on the outlet of the DPF. And the 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 smoking gun for a flushed out DOC is when your DOC isn't producing a lot of temperature increase, but your DPF is, which basically means that the precious metals are now trapped in the DPF, and the DPF is behaving like a DOC. The DOC is just there, just letting exhaust through it, not doing anything, just being lazy. So then you would have to replace your DOC. But just knowing what temperatures to watch can really tell you, can save you a lot of time trying to sort through this.
and then when you do the DPF cleaning, do you clean the DOC and the DPF at the same time?
Yeah, well, they're separate. I mean, again, they're separate pieces, but yeah, they're run through the process at the same time. And they both get baked and everything, because what we want to do is, of course, get everything out, and we want them to look really nice we don't want them to be, a dirty gray color. We want them to look nice and cleaned, as if they just fresh out of the box.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love that one picture on your TikTok. I looked on there, or it was your YouTube channel, and I saw that before and after. And that one picture, it looked literally after like a brand new filter.
Yeah, that's our goal. And the thing is, that's why I always tell my guys, don't get your dirty hands all over these things, because again, it's not, handprint on a DPF isn't going to affect its performance, but we want that thing to go back to the customer where they go, wow, this looks like a brand new filter, and that's key.
Wow. Is
But
there anything like a non-stick coating that after you clean it, you can spray inside it that wouldn't allow all that gunk to stick to it, or
no,
it does nothing? It just is what it is after you
it
clean
is
it.
because basically that you want to keep the chemicals out of these, because you want this just to be, a DPF is made of, and same thing with a DPF is made out of one of two materials. One is cordierite, and the other is silicon carbide. If you look at a DPF and it's kind of a tan color, that means it's cordierite. If you look at it and it's a gunmetal gray color, and usually it's squares, like checkerboard squares, but inch or so square, that's silicon carbide. And the DOCs are all made out of cordierite, coated with this precious metal plating, and say it with me: platinum, palladium, and
Palladium
rhodium.
and rhodium.
Yeah,
Platinum, palladium, and rhodium. I like it.
and rhodium.
I
Yep.
love it.
And look up the spot price on rhodium. I bet it's 12,000-13,000 bucks an ounce right now. Um,
Wow.
but yeah, I mean, so that's
Man.
really, that's it. So the motor oil, I mean, the motor oil has a big impact, probably more of an impact than anything else. We're up about 50 minutes of chatting about this stuff now. I don't want to go too much further here, because as while I could talk about this all night, I don't think many people are superhuman and want to listen to this all night. But
Yeah.
a question I get a lot is fuel additives. What about fuel additives? And so I think it might make sense to maybe put that on the back burner, do another video coming up
Right.
to kind of tease for this, and maybe have people come back and really talk about the fuel additives, because I've got some opinions about them, not negative, but just more about kind of human nature, about being disciplined enough to use them, and do they work, and what sort of commitment do you need to make financially, and does it make sense? I say, even if they do work, if you're going to spend a dollar on a fuel additive and only get 25 cents worth of benefit, but it's still a benefit, but it doesn't offset the cost. And then, so I think it might make sense for us to, come back to this again and do another video and really do a deep dive on fuel additives. And maybe in the meantime, we can get people to ask some really smart questions, some good, smart people out there. And
Yeah.
that would kind of inspire us to touch on some of these things.
Sounds great. Yeah. And if you have any questions on any other, I mean, I got some ATF fluid, some gear oil for the rear diff, but I'm thinking we'll save that for another video, like you're saying, and just, I think concentrating and answering their questions, I think is important.
Okay. Well, I'm happy with that. Again, Eben, as always, I do appreciate your time. You're always you're a great character to talk to, and got good energy and
Anytime.
good products. So I tell you what, I learned so much from talking to you. It's great.
Happy to. Anytime. I can always help. And if they ever want to check out my channel, Synthetic Oil Protection, they'll see Clinton's truck under 80,000-mile oil analysis, and they'll see it there.
And we should probably talk about in a future video, talk about, oil analysis, about, why you should get it done, and, how much it costs and that sort of stuff. And, there's probably, a bunch of me. I'd like to learn more about, the other fluids you got to pour into a truck and what makes sense. And there's probably some things you're like, hey, it doesn't really matter whether you use something from AutoZone or something from Amsoil. Other stuff really matters. And just making some educated decisions would really help people. But other than that, I would say, stay cool in Las Vegas, Nevada. And I look forward to coming out and visiting you sometime soon. And let's tell the folks again that your channel. What's your YouTube channel?
It's Synthetic Oil Protection, and I'm only on YouTube. And
Okay.
you'll see me there showing how to get the best performance and lifespan out of any vehicle, from a string trimmer, weed whacker, 18-wheeler to a push mower, you name it. We show it all. And my goal is to get people to get their vehicles to run longer and Steve Ronger. That's what we do on the channel.
Yeehaw. I love it. All right.
Yeah.
Eben, thank you very much. Have a great night. And thanks for watching. And remember, we're DPF guys, Atlanta, Georgia. Check out in the diddly do below how to get a hold of us. Check us out on TikTok and YouTube, we had YouTube, but Facebook and all those other places. And we're here to help you out. And come back again. Thanks for watching.
Thanks, James.
You're welcome.
Perfect.